Hook. Imagine a man who was shot in the face, lost an eye, survived 2 plane crashes, tunneled out of a prison camp, was wounded multiple times in battle, and still said, "Frankly, I had enjoyed the war." This is not fiction. This is the true story of one of the most indestructible men in history, Lieutenant General Sir Adrian Carton de Wiart. In the late 19th century, when the British Empire was at its height, a boy was born in Brussels in 1880 who would go on to redefine what unbreakable truly meant. His name was Adrian Carton de Wiart, the son of a Belgian aristocrat. He was sent to England for education, studied at Oxford, and seemed destined for a quiet life among the upper class. But Adrian's heart beat for something else: adventure, danger, and war. When the Boer War broke out in South Africa in 1999, Adrian was only 19. Britain was calling men to arms, but as a foreign national, he wasn't eligible to enlist. That didn't stop him. He faked a name, faked a nationality, and joined the British Army under a false identity, Trooper Carton. He didn't even tell his father. That was the beginning of a life that seemed almost cursed and blessed by war. The first taste of death. In the dusty plains of South Africa, Adrian got his first taste of combat and his first wounds. He was shot in the stomach and groin. It should have killed him, but the young soldier clung to life, was shipped back to England, and instead of retiring from the army, as most would, he begged to go back to the front. That set the tone for everything that would follow. World War I. A legend is born. By the time World War I erupted in 1914, Adrian was already an experienced officer. He was now serving with the British forces in Africa, fighting the Germans in Somaliland, present-day Somalia. There, during a battle, a bullet struck him in the face, destroying his left eye and tearing off part of his ear. Most men would have begged for mercy. Adrian? He wrapped his face with a bandage and kept commanding his troops until he collapsed from blood loss. When he returned to London, he wore an eye patch and carried himself with a calm confidence that shocked doctors. He once said, "You can't imagine what fun it is to be shot at without a result." But the Great War was far from over. Transferred to the Western Front in Europe, he saw some of the worst fighting in history: Ypres, Somme, Passchendaele. He was shot in the skull, the ankle, the hip, the leg, the hand, and lost his left hand after a grenade explosion mangled it beyond repair. Frustrated by how long it took surgeons to amputate, he tore off his own fingers with his teeth. Yes, you read that right. And then he went back to fighting.
A soldier of iron. Adrian Carton de Wiart was now a walking symbol of endurance. Eye patch, empty sleeve, dozens of scars. Yet every time he was wounded, he healed and returned to command. His soldiers adored him. To them, he was a warrior out of legend, a man who could not be killed. By 1918, he was one of Britain's most decorated officers. He earned the Victoria Cross, the highest award for bravery in the British Empire, for his leadership during the Battle of the Somme. The citation read, "His courage and disregard for danger were beyond praise. He displayed magnificent gallantry under heavy fire, inspiring his men with his example." But Adrian was not done with war. In fact, peace seemed to make him restless. Between wars, a taste of politics and diplomacy. After the armistice, Adrian was sent to Eastern Europe. The Russian Civil War had left chaos behind, and Poland was fighting for survival against the Bolsheviks. Adrian became Britain's military representative to the new Polish state, and he quickly became close friends with Polish leader Józef Pilsudski. He lived in Warsaw for years, dressed like a local nobleman, and even learned Polish. He went hunting with aristocrats, drank heavily, and thrived in the chaos of post-war Europe. When asked about his experiences, he simply said, "I honestly enjoyed the war. I wouldn't have missed it for anything." World War II. The unkillable returns. By the time World War II began in 1939, Adrian was nearly 60 years old, retired, scarred, half-deaf, one-eyed, one-handed. You might think he'd sit this one out. He didn't. He was called back to active duty and sent to lead British forces in Norway in 1940. During a mission, his plane crashed into the Mediterranean Sea near Libya. He and the crew survived the crash but were captured by the Italians. For most people, this would be the end of the story, but not for Sir Adrian. The Great Escape. The Italians imprisoned him in a POW camp near Florence. He was 60 years old, with one hand and one eye. Yet he spent months digging a tunnel with other prisoners and escaped. For 8 days, he trekked across the Italian countryside, avoiding patrols, starving, exhausted, and still refusing to give up. Eventually, he was caught again, but even his captors couldn't help admiring him. When he was brought before Italian officials, they were stunned by his calm. Mussolini himself authorized his release later, using him as a diplomatic channel between Britain and Italy. The unkillable soldier was now a peace envoy. The final adventure. After the war, Adrian served as the British representative to China during the final years of World War II. He met Chiang Kai-shek, dealt with warlords, and even witnessed the chaos of the Chinese Civil War firsthand. Finally, in 1947, at the age of 67, he retired to the Irish countryside. He spent his last years fishing and reading. Peace at last for the man who had survived everything. When asked about his life, he simply laughed and said, "I really enjoyed the war. It was the best time of my life." He died in 1963 at the age of 83, quietly in his sleep, after surviving everything the world could throw at him. Legacy of a living legend. Sir Adrian Carton de Wiart's story sounds too incredible to be real, but every wound, every battle, every escape was documented. Winston Churchill himself admired him deeply and described him as a model of gallantry and devotion. He was the embodiment of the indomitable spirit, a man who could lose half his body and still smile in the face of death. His autobiography, Happy Odyssey, remains one of the most astonishing war memoirs ever written. In an age of modern heroes and cinematic legends, Adrian Carton de Wiart's life stands apart because no fiction writer could ever have invented him. He wasn't a superhero. He was flesh and blood, brutal, brave, reckless, and unstoppable. A man who simply refused to die. And that is why history remembers him not just as a soldier, but as a legend of survival. A real-life warrior who looked death in the eye, smiled, and carried on. Would you like me to format this into a YouTube storytelling script style, with short rhythmic paragraphs and dramatic pacing for narration? That version would make it sound cinematic and gripping for an audience.